Hi everyone, I'm Ben,
And I'm Danny.
and this is the aptly named Ben and Danny show. So we're going to look at, as you've probably read, we're going to look at how to build video games from scratch. We're both experienced in games development, so I've been developing games now for, I don't know, yonks, absolute yonks, and it's one of my favorite things to do. I'm a PhD student here at the University of Lincoln School of Computer Science, and I'm also an RA, but I have a fair amount of games development experience. I absolutely love making games, so I'm really excited today to be talking about one of my favorite things. So, yeah.
Let's talk about my experience a bit. I came from a computer science background and kind of transitioned more into games in my third year. For my dissertation, I did a VR application, and then I've now transitioned to doing a PhD, and I'm focusing on using games as a way to help students. So that's my bit of a background. I'm not as in-depth knowledge as Ben, but I'm getting there. I'll get there one day.
um, so yeah, just to give you a bit of context about this series. So, like I said, it's about how to build games from scratch. So, if you don't have any experience making games, that's fine. If you have some experience programming, that's also fine. If you have, a background in computer science and you maybe want to make the transition into, oh well, I like playing games and I'd be interested in how they're developed, that's also fine as well. So, regardless of your experience, you should be able to follow along with this. And I think the aim of this is, you won't be an absolute wizard at the end of this.
You're not going to know it all.
You're not going to be like a games development god, but it should give you enough to kind of learn and pursue further, I think. But that being said,
sorry to jump in, but you'll understand the basics to then it will help you progress onto things you could do more complex stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's all this stuff comes with experience. You as with anything, after years of experience, you become really good at making games and stuff. The thing is if you're thinking about getting into games development is a really useful skill to have on your CV. A lot of people find jobs in games development, but also things like VFX artistry and stuff like that. So games development is quite a good, useful skill to have on your CV. And yeah, that's pretty much it, really. I think the aim of this really is, at least in my experience, most tutorials involving a game engine, they start quite fast-paced and they delve right into the code, and you're stuck there going, hang on, what's that all about? So I think the idea, what we've planned for this, is to give you a kind of gentle introduction into game development. So we're going to start with the fundamentals of Unity, how everything works, and then get into the more nitty-gritty stuff later down the line. So throughout this series, we'll be building a little platformer game. So, it's not the best game. It's not a triple A.
I like the game, Ben. I think it looks cute.
It's not it's not nothing you could really. It's not like a triple A standard game. It's just a little game. But the reason we've designed it in this way is that there's a lot of core features in games development built into this game. So things like we can conveniently touch on collision detection, we can look at scripting, we can look at animation and things like loading in textures and so forth with this kind of game. So I'll show you a demo here. I've got my screen shared. I'll also kind of show you the interface and stuff that we're going to use. So this is the little game that we might not have something exactly like this by the end, but the idea is that it should look something like this. So this game is just a little platformer. It has some cute little sprites. So you can play the game and you can move around. I mean, it's not the best game. I just saw
Chris put in the chat, wait, you told me this would be the best game ever.
Sorry for that, Chris. Yeah.
Also, Saint Man, yes, this will be saved and uploaded for later to watch again.
Yeah, so if you want to have a look later and stuff, that's all good. But as you can see with this game, it's just a fairly simple game. We've got some enemy AI, we've got collision detection, we've got some animations. We're doing things like jumping. We've got the camera script. We've got a little score system. We've got tile maps. There's all kinds of different things we can talk about in this game. So the idea of this game is to quite literally give you a whistle-stop tour of some of the things you can do when building a game, and the fundamentals. So you can go from this and make your own game. It doesn't have to be a platformer, but the idea is we're trying to give you a whistle-stop tour of these
giving
features.
you the tools for you to then apply them elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it, actually. Having these tools and yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a game engine called Unity, and we're going to talk a bit more about that in a bit. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But today we're going to look at introducing what Unity is. So what's a game engine, that kind of stuff. We're going to talk about the fundamentals of Unity, so some of the core concepts you need to know about Unity, and we're going to go through the editor today as well. So we're going to show you what all this stuff means very briefly, and we'll show you how to download it, install it, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
There's a question in the chat though, Ben.
Yep.
It says, in terms of a AAA game, what goes into making them?
Well, that is a really good question. So I would say a lot of it is just lots and lots of hours of work. They use essentially the same approach that we're going to take. Just there's teams of people developing this kind of stuff.
Chris just put money.
Money, yeah.
Money and a huge team, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots and lots of money.
So if you walk into a AAA game studio, there's there's teams of people working on the smallest little things, and it's quite interesting just how many people are focusing on one thing that I'd like. Oh right, okay, I didn't realize that. That's very interesting. So for example, optimization of games and stuff like that. There's entire teams dedicated to this. So with a lot more,
resources
that you can build AAA games, but essentially they're using the same kind of tools. So some AAA games have been built with Unity, for example, what we're going to use. Some use Unreal Engine, some use in-house game engines that they've built themselves. Yeah, so it's a good question. Yeah. So yeah, we're gonna have a look at Unity and stuff. So the first thing I want to touch on, I guess, is what a game engine is. So I've talked quite a lot about a game engine. I've talked constantly about game engine this, game engine that. If you were to make a game from scratch, you would have to make everything from scratch too. So if you wanted to make a game with no game engine, you'd have to write code for the physics. You'd have to write code for displaying textures, rendering objects, stuff like that, and
animation, all of like lights, sound.
Exactly. You'd have to write the kind of software that this game runs on from scratch. So a game engine is kind of like a toolkit where most of the boilerplate stuff is already done for you. So you don't have to worry about a physics engine. You don't have to write code to do these stuff which appears in every game. So that's kind of what a game engine is. I mean, you could think of game engine. I mean, I think people have different definitions of what a game engine is, but I think of a game engine like that, really. It's just a kind of toolkit where a lot of the stuff is already done for you and you can just kind of use it. So you use the game engine really to make your life as a games developer easier. You only have to worry about writing the game itself, not the software that the game runs on. And I can't, off the top of my head, I can't think of a good analogy for this.
Well, I had thought about one last night, and it's a kind of a pizza analogy. It's you have.
I'm interested in this analogy.
Okay. So you have a pizza, and you have all your toppings. You have your sauce. Now, what a game engine does, it gives you the components, the features of let's say the pizza. So it gives you the dough, it gives you all your toppings, rather than you having to make the dough from scratch, make your cheese from scratch, make your sauce from scratch. It's basically giving you the building blocks to help you finish that final product.
Yeah, so that's a good way of thinking of it. I mean, Chris kind of in the chat has said very similar thing. He said it's like making dinner but not growing the vegetables. So yeah, essentially building a game without a game engine is like making a pizza where you have to make the kind of subcomponents of a pizza, or if you're making dinner, you don't have to worry about growing the vegetables. So if you were to make a pizza from scratch, you'd have to make the dough. It's not too bad, but you'd have to grow your own tomatoes if you're putting tomatoes on a pizza, or you're using the puree. You'd have to get your own cheese. You'd have to have a cow in the field somewhere, right? So the effort going into making one pizza is quite a lot, completely from scratch. Whereas conceptually, a game engine is kind of like that. It's kind of where you go to the supermarket and you buy the dough, you buy the tomato puree. It's already made for you, and you can worry about the toppings on the pizza, or what the pizza's going to taste like.
Worried about, you're more focused on the design and what your game actually is, or what your pizza looks like, rather than what this. What's that word? Specificities? Is that a word? The specifics of the game.
Yeah, exactly. And I think
Chris is confused.
Yeah, Chris has aptly noted that many animals you can milk to make cheese. Sheep, goats, and in theory, cats will.
Why would you milk a cat, Chris?
Cat cheese. Nice.
Cat cheese. Oh god, that's really amazing.
But that's really what a game engine is. I mean, we haven't talked specifically about what makes a game engine, but that's the reason people use game engines to make games rather than building from scratch. Is it gives you a solid base that you can work on top of, really, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to use a game engine. In fact, this one here, Unity, this weird interface we've got here, and we're going to talk a bit more about this in a second. But this is what we're going to use. We're going to use the Unity game engine. So Unity is the most popular game engine in the world at this point. I think a couple of years ago it used to be Unreal Engine, or UDK as it was known as then. But Unity now is one of the most popular game engines now for developing not only games but things like visualization tools, virtual reality experiences, all kinds of stuff. So it's a really good tool to learn, and that's what we're going to talk about. So first off, I think Chris has noted that game development knowledge, building a game without an engine is like trying to milk a cat to make cheese. Yeah, well, that's what.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I'm going to use that now.
Well, if we've learned one thing today, it's that that we can building a game without an engine is like trying to milk a cat to make cheese. Yeah,
that's going in a quote book somewhere.
Yeah, that's strange. So what I'll do is I'll talk about how to actually get Unity. So all you do really is you go over to Google and just type in Unity, and then you just download Unity. There'll be an option to download either Unity itself or the Unity Hub. In fact, I'll pull up the I'll pull up Google and we'll do this together here. So if I go here and I type in Unity Hub, I'm not sure if you can see that. I might zoom in a bit, and then you'll get unity3d.com/get-unity/download. So you click on here, and there's two options. So there's choose your Unity plus download, and then there's download Unity Hub. So you can do either. But I would recommend going with Unity Hub. So Unity Hub is a really useful tool. A few years ago, Unity used to just be, you'd have to constantly download it. When a new version of Unity comes out, you'd have to go download it and then uninstall the old one and then reinstall the new one. And it was a hassle. So Unity Hub takes that away, really. So you'd click download, you'd download it, you'd run it, you'd install it. One thing to note is when you download Unity and you install it, make sure that firstly it's I'll get onto Unity Hub in a second, but make sure in the installer that you also install Visual Studio, because we'll need that. I think it gives you an option halfway through the installer to whether or not you want to download Visual Studio, but just make sure that you've got that ticked so we can edit scripts. So that's it, really. You just type in Unity, download Unity Hub. It's free. I think you might have to sign up for an account, but that's pretty much it. So sign up for an account, download Unity Hub, and then when you have it installed, you should be able to type in Unity Hub like this, and just run this application, and you'll be presented with something like this. So you have a couple of things here. So you've got, if, for example, you want to supplement your
Do you want to make it a bit bigger, Ben?
I don't think I can, unfortunately.
Can you not?
No.
Sure, can you not make it full screen?
Well, I could, but it would just be the same
That's
resolution.
True. That is very true. Oh, well. You'll be able to see it.
So if you wanted to supplement your learning, throughout the series, there is actually a tab in Unity Hub called Learn, and on here there's all kinds of stuff. There's tutorials, there are projects that you can download and have a look at, play around with. There's, like I said, tutorials. So, for example, working with scripts. You might not be able to see this because it's quite small on the screen, but there's all kinds of tutorials on here. I'd recommend checking this out if you have some free time. And
yeah, there really are some good ones on the Unity store. I've used them before to learn like certain game development techniques.
Yeah, and the good thing is about this is it's not just enough to get you going. If, for example, you want to, because this series is quite a gentle introduction into Unity and games development, so we're not going to cover like really advanced topics. But if you want to go, if at the end of this you want to go from, oh, okay, well, I've learned all that, but I'd like to learn more, this is a really good place to go. And this is the reason I'm showing you it, is that you can go to this after you've done this series and followed along and built the game. And you can go forward and learn even more stuff. So this ranges from very basic things like working with scripts to, for example, an introduction to the VFX graph or HDRP decal projectors, even things like visual scripting, and there'll be stuff on here on more advanced topics like compute shaders and stuff like that. And if you want to write your own shaders, that kind of stuff. So there's loads of tutorials out there. And as it says here, learn.unity.com also has even more tutorials. So there's no, you're not going to be short of learning materials.
There's something for everyone out there.
Yeah. And as I said, I said this before, but learning Unity and games development is quite a useful skill to have, even if you're a computer scientist, even if you don't have anything to do with computer science. If you want to get into something that's quite fun, and if you're a computer scientist and you're looking for a kind of niche that you could, if you're a student, for example, if you graduate from university, you want to go into a field that's quite interesting. Unity isn't just used in games development. It's used all over. People use it for architecture visualizations, for example. People use Unity for all kinds of different stuff. So it's definitely something that's definitely not just limited to the games development world.
Yeah, you'll be able to apply the skills in a large variety of applications.
Yeah. So yeah, there's this Learn tab, and I just wanted to talk about that quickly. There's community, so there's things like the Unity blog. I'm not sure what Unite now is. It's probably digital programming series. So yeah, series similar to the one that you're watching now. There's answers, all this kind of stuff. So if you have a question, there is an answers thing. There's all kinds of stuff. But what I'd recommend is just having a look through Unity Hub, because there's a lot of stuff here. But the two ones of these you'll probably use the most are installs and projects. So I'll talk about installs. So these are the current versions of Unity I've got on my machine. So I've got Unity 2020, which is what we're going to use. We've got Unity 2019, and I've actually got Unity 5.5 from years ago.
Oh, wow.
installed somewhere on here. So yeah, that's interesting. So I think we've got a question in the chat. Would it be beneficial for an electrical engineer trying to go into semiconductors and PC components development? Well, I think a big part of that, I think a part of that would be things like CAD, and if you want to, some companies recruit developers for things like visualization. In fact, I would say most of the Unity jobs out there, at least from what I've seen, don't really focus that much on games development. It's things like product visualization and building experiences and stuff like that. Would it be beneficial though for I think you could find some use from it, I think, even if it's just visualization. And yeah, I think everyone could find a use with it for sure. Yeah,
definitely.
So anyways, back to the installs and stuff. So I've got 3 installs here. And the reason I'm showing you this is if you download Unity Hub and you want to get Unity installed, it's quite easy. So you go to this Installs tab, and if you want to download the latest version, you just click Add up here in the top right. So you click on that, and it will say select a version of Unity. So, for example, there's Unity 2020, which is what we're going to use. There's Unity 2021, which I haven't downloaded yet, but I will be soon. And there's older ones like 2019, 2018, this kind of stuff. But you just select a version, you just click next, and it asks you, do you want to add some additional stuff? Just make sure in that one you click Visual Studio. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward. You just go to Installs, click Add, and then just choose the Unity version you want, and you're away. Just let it install, and you'll be fine. So we've talked about installs. Probably the most common page you're going to use in Unity Hub is the Projects tab. So this is where all your Unity projects are stored. So for example, here I've got Platformer Game, which is the game I just showed you. It's not a great name, but
I feel like we need to name it.
Yeah, I mean,
or get someone from the audience to name the new game.
Yeah. Well, at the moment, it's just called Platformer Game. But there's some other ones like Lincoln Island, Flappy Swan. I've got tons of projects here, as you can see.
Flappy Swan is another session that me and Ben will be doing within the Festival of Learning. So if you want to book onto that, please do. just promoting our other sessions.
So as you can see, it tells you the Unity version. It tells you, so you can build Unity games for not just Windows or Mac or whatever. You can actually choose other things like WebGL. If you want to run it in a browser, you can
do mobile. Yeah,
for example, VR headsets, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So
you should have done VR before. I mean, I did a degree using VR rather than mobile.
That's fair. But yeah, there's essentially that it tells you, your projects, and you can click on one of these to open it. So, for example, if I wanted to open this platform game that I just did, I would just click this and it would open it for you. Now that's fairly obvious. Up here, there is a new button, and if you click on the little drop down, it'll let you choose a new project with a certain version. So I can say 2020, for example, and it will say, hey, let's create a new project with Unity 2020. So there are a couple of templates here. So you don't have to worry about what these all are really, but essentially the two we're going to focus on are 2D and 3D. So what? No Python, Ben Phil says. No Python this time, Phil. Just C#.
No.
It's good to see Phil's here though. So we're going to build a 2D game for the series, but there are also options. If you want a 3D game, if you want to build something that's quite cinematic and quite intensive, something like high definition render pipeline is a good option. There's the URP, which is used for games development too, but we're going to focus really on 2D. There are other templates here if you want to have a look at them. So I'm not exactly sure what an FPS micro game is, but you can download.
I thought you knew all, Ben.
I don't know all.
One of these days you're going to have to use that.
If you wanted to download, for example, a 2D mobile game and stuff, there's a lot of stuff like AR, VR, and stuff. And as Phil says, Unity definitely is good for 2D games. Although maybe I'd try Godot for these days just for a change. And well, what Phil's getting on here is a good idea. I mean, trying out other game engines. There's not just Unity. There's things like Godot, and I mean that's a really interesting example of a game engine. I think there's tons of other game engines out there. Unreal's a really good one. And if you are interested at the end of the series in looking to build games, maybe decide, I'll try Unreal. I'll try, I don't know, the CryEngine, I think it is.
I think it.
It's tons of games.
There's loads of them out there. Yeah. I mean, you might find one that suits you over Unity, but we're saying Unity today because that's what we feel most comfortable in. It's it depends on what you're doing and your style of game design and how you feel, how you want to use the engine to suit your game needs.
The other thing about Unity is it's quite simple to actually it's one of the game engines where you can pick it up quite easily, and
it's very user friendly. It's a lot of, I wouldn't say like drag and drop, but it is a lot of like you click a few buttons and you'll be able to make a pretty simplistic game.
Yeah, exactly. So if I wanted to make a new project, for example, I'm going to make a 3D project just to show you, and we'll redo this in the next one. But if I click on 3D or 2D or something, I can click on 3D, and then I type in the project name. So I'll call this like test.
Oh my god, my chair keeps breaking. I'm very sorry.
That was quite loud.
I'm very sorry.
So I can I say test project and I choose where I want this to go, and I just click create. And Unity does take some time to initialize, so it'll give you this little loading screen and a little prompt. It does take a while to sometimes open or create a new project, but what it's doing essentially in the background is importing all the default assets. It's building the project structure and so forth. So and Phil says I'd recommend starting with a simpler game engine like Construct 2 or GameMaker to start with, but as you learn, Unity is a very good choice. And if you want to, that's a good idea. GameMaker, for example, is a really straightforward, easy to learn game engine. If you want to go from like thinking something very gentle and get into,
it's Scratch. If you could use Scratch to make a very simple game.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like Scratch, things like Game Maker and stuff. If you want to go that route, that's also good as well. I think it'll be a really gentle introduction, but I think people learn in different ways. If you want to go from something gentle, or if you want to get kind of straight into it, it's up to you. And Phil asks, which version of Unity are you using? So for this, I'm using 2020.3.8. I'm not sure if you can see up there in the top, but it is quite small. But Unity 2020.38, yeah. So this is the Unity editor, and this thing here is called the scene. So this here is called the scene view. So this is I'm not sure how to best describe it. It's not the game itself, but it's the 3D environment where you can edit the scene, the level.
It's like the overall kind of God view, I would say. You can see the entirety of it without, even with like the camera in there, the lights. It's just your developer look. Bird's eye view, basically. Bird's eye view. That's probably a simple way of saying it. So
if you were to develop a game and you wanted to build a level and put the character in there and stuff, this is the window you do it in. So it just shows the scene itself, like the level that you're building. And there's a couple of other windows here, like the hierarchy. And a good analogy just pointed out by Chris is that if the game is a movie, then the scene is like the stage, and that's actually a really good way of putting it. The scene is where you build the levels, and the game is the kind of
where you're working with all like the content within Unity, all of your kind of little objects.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. I've never thought about it that way, but that's a really good way of thinking about it. This is almost like the stage where you set the stage, you build the props, and then the game itself is like filming around that stage, and there's other windows here. So we've got the scene view, we've got the game view, we've got the asset store, which it says here the asset store has moved, but you can do it through the browser, or you can open the package manager. But the scene and the game are the two main windows here. So when you click play up here, it will show the game view. The scene is where you will spend most of your time though, actually building the levels. There's the hierarchy here on the left. So what this does, and I'm not going to talk about what these are because we'll get into that in a bit more detail, but this hierarchy shows what is in the level. So in the level at the moment, there is a camera, as you can see, and there is a directional light. And when I click on these, you can see it highlights them. And don't worry about this weird stuff. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But when I select these, it is clearly selecting something, right? The next thing and probably one of the most important ones is the inspector, right? So if I click on the camera, you'll see this window appear called the inspector, and suddenly it's got all this stuff. And don't worry about what all of this means. Again, we're going to get into that in a bit more detail soon. But if I click on the main camera, this pops up in the inspector. Directional light, this pops up in the inspector. So what this is doing really is it's showing you the properties of this thing in the scene. So this
Kind of like the settings and allow you, but it'll allow you to edit.
Yeah, exactly.
You edit them.
So, for example, this camera has a setting of clear flag skybox. So don't worry about what that is, but I can set it to a solid color. So now the camera will only render a black color, for example. And don't worry about what that is and stuff, but what I'm trying to get at is that here, when I click on the camera, it allows you to edit some settings of the camera, and same with the directional light. So the directional light is just, you can think of this as the sun, the sun in the scene. And
it's the main light source of the scene.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll talk more about what these are later on. But the inspector window, that's what it does. It just shows you of the thing that you're currently highlighting. So in this case, the camera, what are the settings for that? And there's all kinds of things that, is it a static object? Does it have tags and all this kind of stuff? But when I select it, it just highlights that object and its properties in this window here. So the hierarchy is stuff in your level. The inspector is the properties of something you've selected. The scene is where you build the game, right? You build the levels. And probably another important one is the project down here. So the project is all the assets in your game. So currently there's nothing in this project because it's an empty project. But if you had, for example, some 3D models that are going to go into your game, or you had some textures that you're going to place on something in your game, the files for your game, this is where they live. They live in the assets folder.
Yeah, it's the main way you can find your assets and navigate and put them into your application, and kind of it's kind of just a big folder, a big area where you just store your, as Ben said, your assets, your textures, your anything you want that it relates to building your game.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty much everything, like the files, the models, the sounds, whatever, all goes in the assets folder, including things like scripts. And this window, probably we won't really touch on it today because we're not really going to touch on importing assets until next time. But next time we'll be using this window quite a lot to bring in files into our game, and then we can take those files and actually put them in the scene and do stuff with it. So yeah, that's what that's the hierarchy. The hierarchy, just to reiterate and summarize this kind of stuff, hierarchy is all the stuff that's currently in your level. The inspector is if you highlight something in the hierarchy, like the main camera or the directional light, it gives you the properties of this object. So, for example, this directional light has a transform and a light and all kinds of stuff. And again, we're going to talk a bit more about that later, but that's all the inspector does. It just shows you properties of the thing you're currently highlighting. And then finally, the project window is stuff for your game.
It's where you store all of the stuff. We keep using that word. We need a better word for stuff. Yeah. This basically the stuff you need for your game.
I've just seen that Beth is in the chat, so hello, Beth. Some very kind words from Beth, bless her.
So Ben is the best teacher. Always love watching you teach. Oh,
I'm blushing. Thanks, Beth. It's good to see you. So we've talked about these windows. We've talked about the hierarchy, the inspector, the project. We've talked about the scene as well. If you want to test your game, so you might make some changes to your game, and then you go, oh, okay, will those changes actually work? Have I done the right thing? If you click play, what will happen is it will run the game. So this is the game view. As you can see, it's not a very entertaining game.
Nice screen of just sky and blurry ground.
Yeah. So So yeah, this is the game view. So when you press play, it'll test your game, and you can actually interact and play the game as I was earlier. So yeah, you can do that kind of stuff. There are also menus up here that are quite useful. So there is assets. You can create assets that go into your assets folder. Game objects. If you want to add some game objects into your scene, you can do it this way. But there's all kinds of things, and we're not going to look at these today, but this will come up.
It'll be useful to know before we start actually using them in the tutorials.
Yeah,
just to know where everything is.
Yeah, later on in the series we'll be using these a lot more, but for now, just think of these as, oh right, they exist.
That's where that is.
So for example, if I wanted to I guess we'll talk a bit about how you control the scene, right? So if I wanted to add a cube, for example, to this scene, I'd go to this game object thing, and there's all kinds of stuff here. I think it's kind of overwhelming sometimes. You're like,
there's so much.
What's going on? But if you go to 3D object, this has a list of kind of just default objects, like a cube. If you want to add a cube to your game scene for some reason, you can click on cube, and now we have a cube in the scene. Now I'll talk a bit more about how to actually move objects and stuff in the scene. So do you remember earlier and also, by the way, if you click on an object, you don't have to click on it here in the hierarchy. You can actually just click it in the scene itself. So I'm just clicking in the scene and it selects it.
I think for when there's a lot of assets in your game, probably easier to use the hierarchy. But when there's only now there's only one, you can easily just click it within the scene.
Yeah, exactly. I constantly...
I'm interchanging what I'm always using.
I'm always flicking between the hierarchy and so forth. So earlier I said, don't worry about those weird arrows, because you were like, what the hell's this kind of stuff? What's all this?
Lots of colors.
Yeah. So these are, I think, I'm not sure of the name. I think they're called handles in Unity. So these allow you to move the object around the environment. So if I click on this one, for example, and I click and drag, I can move this up. I can move this object up. And note as well, here in the right, you'll see this position, this Y position, is going up and down because I'm moving it up and down with my mouse.
So the Y denotes the up and kind of the down movement of an asset, or of a game object, I should say.
Yeah, exactly. And then, for example, here we have here we can use this one to translate it in this direction. We can use this to make it go in this direction. If you want to kind of just, there are other ones here, like these little planes. I'm not sure if you can see that, but you can click and drag on these as well and kind of drag it around like that. And you can click and drag on this plane. But yeah, this is how you move objects in the scene, really, is you use these handles. But you might think, okay, well, how do I rotate an object? Because cubes are pretty boring when they're just faced like that.
Cube.
So here in the top left as well, there is there's the hand tool, there's the move tool. So we're currently selected on the move tool. So we're moving.
And that moves the X, Y, and Z kind of coordinates, as I would say.
Yeah, and then exactly, that's all this does really, is it just moves an object around. And as you can see, these numbers are going crazy because I'm just moving it around. But we have other ones here. So we have the rotate tool, right? And this looks a bit different. So I've just selected the rotate tool. This allows you to rotate an object round on this axis, and then I can rotate it on this axis, and I can click somewhere in the middle and just rotate it freely, for example. But have a play with these, right? You can select different tools here. So for example, you've got the scale tool, which does the same thing, but it scales it. So we can make it bigger.
That's a long cube.
So for example, if you wanted to, so I'm just pressing Control Z here to undo. But if you wanted to make a floor, for example, you could scale it down on this axis, and then this one scales the entire thing. So you could do this, and now suddenly...
I actually did not know that.
So now we've got a floor, we've got a cube here that kind of looks like a floor. We could add another game object. What have we got here? We've got let's let's live life on the edge and make a capsule, right? So I'm gonna move this around. So I've clicked on the move tool, so I can move this up, and I'll just move it over here, and I'm just moving this over here. So you can see there's a capsule here. You can duplicate this. So
Long cube. Okay. Yeah. I know that's a rectangle. Okay, I realized that.
Thank you. Yeah.
So it's a cuboid.
Yeah.
Wow, my education. I promise you, I have a great education.
But the point is here, we can move this round. We can rotate it. We can rotate this and have it maybe facing this way. We can move this down, for example. There are other tools here, so these aren't really that relevant for 3D games. But there's that's the scale tool. There's the rect tool. So this tool here is for 2D games and canvases. We could move things. So as you can see, it's a bit strange in 3D. I mean, that's very odd. But in 2D games, it makes a hell of a lot more sense. I've never used this before, but you can move, rotate, and scale things all in one, which is horrendous. I wouldn't use that.
That's too confusing.
And then the editor tool, I don't think I've ever used this, but you can edit components of that object. So we've made a little scene here. It's not much of a game at this point. We've just got a kind of floor that is either a rectangle or a cuboid, whatever it is.
Stop judging me on my shape recognition.
So we have some capsules and stuff, and then if I click play, you'll see that it's somewhere up there. It's up here somewhere. Yeah, there we go. There's our game. So we can also move this camera around. So I've clicked on the camera, and as you can see, I can move this camera around, and there's a little preview down here in the bottom right. If I move this camera up and to the right, I can kind of get, something, and then I can rotate this camera down a bit and maybe move it a bit closer to the objects. And now we have when we click play, it's not much of a game, but we have something. Like we have something.
I don't know. That looks like a start of a Pixar like short.
Yeah. So we've had a look at how to move things in the environment, how to scale things, how to rotate things. There are other buttons here that I'm not going to touch on. Like at the moment, I'm not going to talk about local versus global tool rotation and stuff like that. But we've talked about how to move stuff around the environment. So you could put a cube in your level and move it around and move the camera around. One question that might be in the back of your mind is, okay, that's useful, but how do I actually move around this scene? Because eventually our level is going to get so big that it's not going to fit in this window. So how do we do that? So there are a couple of controls for moving the camera. If I click down the right mouse button and I move my mouse, I can actually look around the scene like this. The scroll wheel zooms in and out, so I'm just moving my scroll wheel up and down. And if you want a bit more control with this, if you hold down the right mouse button, and funnily enough, not much people don't know this, I don't know why, but if you click and hold the right mouse button and then use W, A, S, and D, you can actually fly around the environment. So I can move this camera around. I can zoom right into this, for example.
But that's your scene view camera, not the actual main camera within the game.
Yeah, so exactly. If I could have my camera like this, and if I click play, we can see it snaps to the old thing because the camera is here. I mean, it kind of shows us these lines. It's saying that it's projecting this way. If, however, you want to set this is a shortcut, and it'll take like a minute to talk about it, so I'll show you. But if you move this camera to somewhere where you want the camera to be, you can actually click on, I think it's game object, and click on align with view. And then the camera is now in place where we were. So if we click play,
oh wow, I didn't know that.
The camera is there,
well, there's all these little tips and tricks. It's just so useful to know.
Yeah, But essentially what I'm doing here is I'm just flying around. So I'm holding the right mouse button and I'm just moving around with W, A, S, and D. You can hold Shift as well to move around faster. And I think there's Q and A as well, which go up and down. But, oh, actually, is it Q? Q? Q does something. I don't know what. Yeah, I think it's Q and E. So Q goes down, E goes up. So you can, there's loads of controls there, but that's how you move around the scene. So we've covered how to move around the scene and how to add stuff to the scene. The next thing I want to talk about is very quickly is the fundamentals of Unity, right? So that sounds quite daunting actually when I say it.
Fundamentals.
But the first thing I want to talk about is what is a camera and what's a directional light? And we've kind of talked about this, and you can kind of see what it is. A directional light is the sun, and as you can see, I can move this sun around, and nothing really changes because, well, it's the sun. No matter where we move it, it's always going to be in the same. It's always going to have the same kind of thing. What does matter about the directional light, though, is the rotation. So if I click on the rotate tool and I rotate this sun around, so if I rotate it this way, you can see that the lighting's changing because I'm quite literally moving the sun. As you can see in the background, you can see the sun.
You can see the shadows on the objects as well.
Yeah, so all I'm doing is I'm rotating this directional light around. So that's what a directional light is it just gives us some light in the scene. Without a directional light, everything is pretty dark, apart from ambient light. So yeah, we'll need this, and we can change things like the intensity. So if we want like a really bright sun, we can turn the intensity up to 50. We can turn this down so it's quite, I don't know, sunsetty. I don't know if that's not a word, but you get what I mean. So that's what directional light is. It gives us light in the scene. The camera itself, though, is, using Chris's analogy, if the scene is the stage, right, the camera in that where you film the game, right, is this camera. This is the camera that you view the game through, and there's properties that you can change in this camera. So like I said, you know, we can move this camera around. There's things here like the field of view. So if we want to zoom in, we can change the field of view to be something quite narrow. And then suddenly, you know, we're zoomed in quite a lot, as you can see at the bottom right. So if I press play, this is a very zoomed in camera. But we can change a bunch of properties, and that's what the camera is. That's what the directional light is. And the next thing I want to talk about is game objects. So we'll be talking quite a lot throughout this series about game objects. When I say game objects, I mean just anything that's in your scene. So all of these things that are in your in the scene are called game objects. Okay. So this is a game object. This is a game object. All of these are game objects. And as you can see here, when we click the game object menu, there's all kinds of different objects we can put in. We can put in lights. We can put in particle systems. We can put in an audio source to emit audio, video players, cameras themselves, you know, models, anything. So anything that exists in your level.
Yeah, so every object kind of in your game, from like the characters you put in or collectibles to lights, cameras, like special effects.
Pretty much everything.
Like with a game object, you'll need to, so what we'll kind of transition onto is properties and the components to make it an actual thing within the game.
Yeah.
For it to become that character or the environment or that special effect, it needs kind of a position. It needs a kind of other elements which make up the full game object within your scene.
Yeah. So as Danny said, game objects pretty much encompass. I like to think of it as a kind of umbrella term for pretty much anything in your level. So if there's a tree, it's a game object. If there is a particle effect, it's a game object. If there is something emitting an audio source, it's a game object. Pretty much everything in your scene, including lights, the sun, the camera, they're all game objects. And the reason they're called game objects is because they're game objects. Right?
Within a game.
One thing you'll notice though is if I flick through all these objects, so I'm just pressing up and down here with my arrow keys, they all have this thing on the right, So I'm selecting the camera, the directional light, cube. I don't know why I spelt this we'll call this capsule. So that's another thing. You can actually rename objects. So if you click on it, you can type in capsule 2 or something.
Or
so
if you go in the inspector in your top right, you can edit it that way. You can rename it that way.
Yeah, so you can do it this way as well, where you can name it that way. They all have this thing called a transform, right? And you'll notice that as I'm flicking through these, all of these have a transform. So one question on your mind is, what is a transform?
Yeah, Ben, what's a transform?
Well, the word transform comes from, at least I believe, comes from transformation matrix. So the way objects are in the world, they have a transformation matrix, which is multiplied by a bunch of other matrices to actually put it in the environment. And don't worry about that. That's just where the name comes from. But you can think of a transform really as something which has a position, a rotation, and a scale, really. So everything in this scene has a position. The camera has a position. We can move this camera around in the environment.
Yeah, it's the X, Y, and Z coordinates. Yeah,
we can rotate it. I mean, I think you can scale a camera, but it does nothing. But this cube has a position. It has a certain rotation. It has a scale. So they all have transforms. Anything that is movable in the environment or has a position in the environment is a game object with a transform. Now, usually every game object in the level has a transform, because that's the reason they're in the level, is they're situated.
It kind of has to have a position.
Yeah. Very rarely, sometimes when you create objects via script, or certain types of objects, especially in 2D, don't have a transform. They have something else which is a bit weird, and for our purposes, it's not really going to affect us. But we'll see it next time when we look at a 2D game, that we won't have a transform. We'll have I think it's called a rect transform 2D, which is like a transform but in 2D, basically. But that's what a transform is it has a position in the environment. So that's what a transform is. And the reason I'm talking about transform and game objects is because these will constantly come up throughout the entire series. I'll be saying transform.position, game object dot whatever. This is what I mean is so this object has a transform, and we call these objects in the scene game objects. And I've stressed that quite a lot, but yeah. So the next thing I want to talk about, and probably one of the most fundamental things of Unity, is Unity is something called it uses an entity-based game engine. So it's called an entity component system. You'll hear people sometimes talking about ECS, and this is what they mean. So this is a very common design pattern in games development. So Unity and Unreal, for example, both embody this idea of entity component relationships. And it sounds quite daunting, entity component. What does that mean?
What does that mean then?
So all this means really is that objects just have components attached to them, right? So you can think of an entity as a game object, right? Because it's an entity in the world. It's a tree, it's a character, it's a whatever. It's an entity within the world. So a game object is an entity, and a component of that entity are things like, all these things on the right, these are called components, right? Now, we're going to talk a bit more about what these are, but the idea is that these components can be reused and placed across many objects. So this cube, for example, that I'm highlighting here, it's called the floor. Let's rename it floor. So the floor, for example, has a transform, right? It has a mesh filter. Now, don't worry about what a mesh filter is, or what a mesh renderer is, or a box collider. But these are all what we call components. So I can fold these. So this floor has a transform, which is a component, a mesh filter, which is also a component, and a mesh renderer, which is also a component. There's also a box collider, which is, again, another component. But this is what we call components, is we can kind of attach components to objects. So an entity is the game object, and a component is something that you would attach to that object. So, for example, the mesh renderer in this case, again, don't worry about these details. It's all kind of settings, but all the mesh renderer does really is it's one job is to show things on the screen. So if I tick this off and disable the mesh renderer, we don't have a floor. You can't see it, right? Because what a mesh renderer component does is it displays something on the screen. That's all it does. That's its one job, is to just show things on the screen. So if we take that away, nothing appears. A box collider, we won't touch on this much, but if for collision detection, we need a box collider. So this allows you to detect collisions for this object. And this is what we mean by components, is you can kind of attach components to an object. You can detach objects. So if I wanted to get rid of this collider, I could just say remove component. There's a big button here with add component. So I can add all kinds of components. I don't know why the word doors there, but I've probably been looking for doors in my thing. So you can attach a script, for example. There are things like effects. That's events, sorry, effects. We can put a line render on this. There's all kinds of different stuff here. So for example, if we wanted to give this a box collider like we did before, or if we wanted to turn this into a cloth, we can do that. We can put these components on there. So I think a good analogy for this, and I'm not sure if this is a good analogy. I don't know. While I was talking just then, I was thinking of how can I explain this, and maybe this is a good idea. So you can kind of think of a car like a entity. So a car is a game object. Think of a car as a game object or an entity. You can think of the components of a car, right? Like an engine, I don't know, the seats, the wheels, for example. They are components of that entity, right? So
they make up the features of the. So yeah, with the car example, you need wheels for it to go. You need an engine to make it move. You need those things to make it do the actual thing you want it to do.
Yeah, it's so for example, a car, a car essentially is the sum of its components. If you have the wheels, the chassis, I'm not a mechanic, but if you have like engine stuff, it makes a car, right? A car is a sum of the components. But the most important part of this analogy is that an engine is a component of a car, right? Now, what I can do is I can take that component from that car, that engine, and I can, with a lot of effort, I could take that engine and transplant it into another car. That component, which is an engine, is reusable. I could take the doors off the car, and if I find another car, I could put the doors on it. I could take, for example, the wheels off a car, and then I could put it on another car. And in that sense, that's what components do. A mesh renderer, for example, you could put on any game object, and it will show it on the screen. You could write a script to make a object rotate constantly, or flash a certain light or something. And then you could put that script, which is a component, onto a game object, and it would just work for anything you put on. And that's what an entity component system is, really, is you have these entities and you can shove components on there. They're reusable. And yeah, I do apologize for saying the word component a lot.
It's very vital. It's a key word to know within like these entity component systems, especially within Unity. It is something that we will say a lot. Well, you need to add a component to this. You need to add a component to add the script, to add the light, to add the texture, and all of those different aspects of which make up the entity, which make up the game object.
Yeah, and the reason we're introducing components at this point and game objects and stuff is that I think one of the issues with most Unity tutorials is they don't really describe this, and then they get into the tutorial and they're suddenly all you hear is, oh, okay, I'm going to add this component to this game object, and what we're going to do is we're going to add this, and it just you just kind of lose track because you can't keep up with it. So the rationale behind this is to hopefully if you understand these fundamentals of what a game object is and why components are useful, how we can attach them, reattach them to game objects, then hopefully that helps, I guess. So yeah, I think really and a last thing, by the way, the entity component system. So we've talked about entities. An entity is a game object. a component is something that's attached to that game object. So a mesh renderer, a collider, an effect, an animation, for example. And a system is Unity itself. So in this case, the ECS, the S of ECS, is Unity itself. It's the system. Yeah, but I think pretty much that covers most of what we wanted to cover today. I mean, I
feel like we've talked about a lot of the different functions within Unity, and I feel like we've covered a lot of the keywords that everyone needs to know. And so going forward, you'll be able to understand what we're saying, especially that word again, adding the components, adding the game object, altering the transform, changing different directional light, kind of changing the camera.
Yeah.
So I think that that's what we talked about today. I think for next episode, Ben, you probably have a little bit more of an idea of what we're going to go through.
Yeah,
so adding. What I remember is that we're adding assets. Sorry to cut you off.
No, it's okay. This stream, you've probably thought, oh, okay, we're gonna get into Unity and we're gonna start using Unity to build a game. But and you've probably at the end of this, you're like, oh, well, we've just talked about Unity. The idea of today was just to introduce you to what we're gonna use throughout this series, but also talk about some fundamentals, as Danny said. What windows are here, like hierarchy inspector, and then entity components. That's probably that. Game objects and transforms are probably the most core things we wanted to cover today. So largely it's just been an introduction. Next time we're going to look at actually starting to use Unity. So we're going to look at importing some assets that we're going to use for the game, and we might have time to get onto building a little bit of a level that we can use, but we'll see. We'll see as time permits. But I think that pretty much covers it for today, really.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. And there is another session on Thursday at 2:00, again on YouTube. So I hope you all can join us then, and we'll say goodbye.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.